Roberto Cruz, he served time, and one of his cellmates was a guy named Roger Cochise Collins. He was the leader of the royal family, known as the Godfather. They ran the drug trade in a large area of Chicago, and they flew all over the country and killed people for money.
The mob is all about making money.
It was completely mob controlled. It exploded, and one thing led to another. They had another casino.
Bobby Cruz tried to huff and puff himself up to be a mafia-made guy.
The mafia is like an octopus. We have tentacles. We go into everything. Unions, construction, garbage, you name it, and we spread.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Throughout the time in the mafia, I was involved in 3 mafia wars. I was involved in 19 murders. I did 22 years of my life in prison. I became the underboss of the most powerful organized crime family in the country.
The room was dimly lit. We walked in the door with our camera gear, greeted by him behind the desk, lighting up a cigarette, of course.
I became a more or less a professional hitman.
Did you want to be that?
No. I just seemed to be good at it.
Right.
You want to learn about the mafia? This is who you talk to.
My name is Salvatore Gravano, Salvatore. Gravano, Gravano. But I'm probably better known as Sammy the Bull. And I'm not going to spell that. Spell that yourself.
In the 70s and 80s, Salvatore Gravano was rising in the ranks of the mafia in the Gambino family. He was and is known around the world as Sammy the Bull and part of the inner workings of New York Mafia. But to understand how Las Vegas came to be and became a part of our investigation, another New York mobster who came before Sammy is key, finding himself driving through a tiny desert town in Nevada in the 1940s.
Bugsy Siegel was on the lam. He went into a small town, and they were gambling. And he stopped to get a cup of coffee or something, but he saw them gambling, and he saw the sheriff coming. He says, "You're going to get arrested, you're gambling." And they told him, they passed a law that gambling was legal there. And that just woke him up, an idea. We have a place in Nevada that could be legal. It's legal to gamble. And we could set up maybe a casino or something there where we could fly people there and gamble and have girls and a whole thing. And we could make a ton of money with this, I think.
Understatement of the century.
I was a journalist for 25 years, working in Las Vegas as a reporter and as an editor in the 80s and 90s. Inevitably, if you're writing about the history of Las Vegas, you're writing about the mob to some extent.
Jeff Schumacher is now the vice president of exhibits and programs at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. He's so knowledgeable about the city's history, he's written 2 books about it. To fully understand how our case investigation wove into the inner workings of Vegas, I took a trip up to Sin City to visit the Mob Museum myself and learned a whole lot.
What happened in 1945 is a group, sort of a syndicate out of New York, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Gus Greenbaum from Phoenix, and Mo Sedway and Davy Berman. These were the 5 principals who were involved in buying the El Cortez Hotel. And the El Cortez had opened in 1941 on Fremont Street near downtown. And these guys invested and bought it. And this was really, I think, would mark the beginning of the mob era in Las Vegas.
Fremont Street was really where the casino boom began, before the Las Vegas Strip was born. Nowadays, you'll find concerts, neon signs, kiosks, and vendors there, near some of the most famous wedding chapels. Bugsy didn't stop at Fremont Street. He expanded, and fast.
Bugsy Siegel was the person who opened the Flamingo in 1946, and then he ran it. He lived about 6 months after the opening, and then he was killed. in June of 47.
Bugsy Siegel's murder is still unsolved, but
If we subscribe to the idea that the mob did kill him, then yes, I think he had run out his welcome with his fellow mobsters, even people who he'd known since he was a child, because he was so arrogant and he was so possessive about the Flamingo that he wanted to do it his way and his way only. And that was not the way the mob operated.
before he was killed, he did a lot in those 6 months at the Flamingo. And whether the Mafia ultimately liked how he functioned, his resort casino was basically the beginning of Vegas as we know it today.
It was completely mob controlled. They built it. He was going out with a beautiful movie star, and she made arrangements to bring in people in theater and stuff, and they put on shows, and it exploded. And one thing led to another. They had another casino. They had a few places, and then every place got hooked up with the Mafia, more or less. They even had legal prostitution in that area. It became a resort area.
So many things were happening in the 50s to bring the mob here, to bring the Rat Pack together to perform. You know, Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and that whole thing helped to create this sort of aura about Las Vegas. And so the mob was involved in not all, but many of the casinos that were built during the 50s. And this continued into the 60s and 70s.
Since it was legal to gamble, the Mafia had to find a way to make money for the mob bosses.
They developed the idea of skimming. And with skimming, you're taking money off the top. So in addition to making a legitimate amount of money from running a casino, you're also making money, taking cash off the top that you're not paying taxes on. And then you're sending that money back to Chicago or Detroit or Cleveland or New York. And that's money that's the mob bosses back home get, and nobody knows the wiser. In the case of New York, you know, famously, the Gambino crime family and other crime families there got involved in the construction business, and they started owning, you know, different companies within construction, or they controlled the unions, and so they were able to make money by controlling that industry. But in Las Vegas, it was really all about the casinos.
Was it easy to launder money through these casinos?
Oh yeah. They didn't even know what it was, so they were always skimming money right off the top. They really didn't know what the hell was going on, especially they were controlling everything.
Would power from the casino, the Mafia, could they do other business dealings and launder money elsewhere? Was that a goal of theirs?
The Mafia is like an octopus. We have tentacles. You know, we go into everything. It's just like what we did in the United States. We went into everything. Unions, construction, garbage, bread, making clothes, you name it, and we spread all over the place.
And so, as the decades went on, the Vegas mobsters expanded.
In Las Vegas in the 70s, the mob, especially the Chicago mob, definitely branched out. A lot of that was you know, business partnerships. A lot of that was the kinds of things you're asking about.
At this point, you're probably wondering how all of this has to do with our Phoenix case. The 3 men who targeted and killed Pat Redmond and his family at their home on New Year's Eve in 1980. Remember, at the end of episode 1 of The Last Hitman, we told you a Tempe businessman named Robert Cruz was part of the Chicago mob. He was related to the number 2 guy in the Chicago Mafia at the time and was trying to become a made man. So he was brokering deals out of the Vegas casinos. Let's tie it all together for you with Phoenix attorney Joe Brownlee and Chicago attorney Greg Owen. The royal family was the murder-for-hire street gang in Chicago.
They ran the drug trade in a large area of Chicago, and they flew all over the country and killed people for money. Roberto Cruz, the way he got involved is he served time in Stateville Penitentiary in Illinois in the 70s, and one of his cellmates was a guy named Roger Cochise Collins. He was the leader of the royal family, known as the Godfather.
Robert Cruz needed to find a way to launder money for the casinos elsewhere and had a family connection in Phoenix.
There's a printing business. I think it would be perfect for us to launder money and maybe do print some illegal things and everything.
Cruz had a relation to Pat Redmond's business partner, Ron Lukazik. Cruz was related to Ron's wife, Joyce.
He made some connections with a casino that he would launder their money through a printing business. And that printing business was owned by Pat Redmond and Ron Lukazik. So Cruz approached the two owners, and Pat Redmond said, "No, I'm not going to sell. I like my business, no." And Ron Lukazik apparently said, "I'd be open to listening to it." Pat Redmond was a problem.
Cruz made a call to the royal family back in Chicago. Eliminate Pat. There was a reason Cruz wanted to use gang members from the royal family.
They felt if they used Afro-American offenders, they wouldn't be linked back to the Mafia, which is who was really behind this, the mob in Chicago.
Cruz paid for Murray Hooper and William Bracey to come out to Phoenix.
Hooper, Bracey, McCall scoped out Redmond's house, Redmond's business, then they went back to Chicago.
As if it was nothing big. A quick job, then back home. That didn't explain how or why Edward McCall got involved in the hit, but attorney Joe Brownlee learned there was a friendship between McCall and Cruz.
What was the motive for McCall to go from a Phoenix police officer to now an assailant in this execution-style murder?
Well, he wasn't a police officer at that time. It had been some time that he had not been a uniformed officer. But it was money. This was a paid hit, and it was all about money.
How much were they making off these hits?
What I was told by this guy who was in the car, drove him, that he had received $50,000 as the remainder of their contract fee, which in 1980 was quite a bit of money.
The mob is all about making money. That's all it's ever been about. The way the mob historically has worked is the strong survive, and if you have some leadership qualities, that's something that you need. People need to respect you, and you have to have earned their respect, and then you work your way up in the mob. It's not like you inherit the throne like the Queen does, right, in England. You have to earn it.
It's how Sammy the Bull rose to power in the Gambino family.
And you made it to underboss.
Yes.
Very high ranking.
Second in command. There's nobody above you but the boss. And you got the boss's ear. It's you and him against the world. So it's not just that you have his ear. I mean, you're part of him. I didn't do anything but be me. And I was trustworthy, I was honest, I was open, I was sincere. I helped a lot of people. And when I was asked to do work, meaning a murder, I did it. And I did it effectively. Money, connections, power, and greed. All of those things control everything.
But just as the Redmond family murder investigation was intertwined with the Mafia in Vegas, things were starting to change.
In the late 1970s or early 1980s. So this was a time of great volatility in Las Vegas for the mob. The mob was under increasing scrutiny from law enforcement and from the FBI and from state gaming regulators. And so there were a lot of people that were being talked to by law enforcement about becoming government witnesses, about becoming informants, about helping out to try to root the mob out of Las Vegas.
The more you talked, the more you were putting the mob at risk.
There were several people who disappeared during this period of time.
In this case, everything started to get weird.
So Bobby Cruz tried to huff and puff himself up to be a Mafia-made guy. And then he disappeared.
Plot twists started to unravel that nobody saw coming.
Joyce Lukazik is charged with ordering the 1980 execution-style slayings of Patrick Redmond and his mother-in-law, Helen Phelps. Prosecutors claim Lukazik ordered the murders because Redmond, who was a business partner of her husband, Ron Lukazik, turned down a business deal worth millions.
The twists and turns were only just beginning.
The judge says, Mr. Brownlee, do you have any more witnesses? I said, yes, one. we call Marilyn Redmond to the stand.
I mean, you could hear air. There wasn't a sound. It was frozen in time. I mean, I'll never forget it. Whew. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it right now from all those years ago.
True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, and produced by Sergio Hernandez. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.